Now let's begin. The September rain drummed against the windows of the two-bedroom apartment where Mitchell Dodd sat across from his son, watching Lonnie's fingers dance across the strings of a battered acoustic guitar. The melody was something original, haunting, and beautiful, but Mitchell knew better than to say so out loud. Not anymore. Not after 7 years of marriage. Takara Steele had taught him that any praise for his son would be met with cutting remarks from her family. "Your father called again," Kara said from the kitchen doorway, her voice tight. She'd stopped using terms like "my dad" or "my family" when addressing Mitchell directly, as if the formality created distance from the conversations she knew he dreaded. Sunday dinner. 4 o'clock. Mother expects us. Mitchell watched Lonnie's fingers still on the strings. The 23-year-old's shoulders tensed, and that familiar look of resignation crossed his face. The same expression Mitchell had seen hundreds of times over the years. It was the look of someone preparing for battle. "I have a gig Sunday night," Lonnie said quietly. "At the Blue Room. It's my first reel." "Cancel it," Kara interrupted. "You know how Mother gets when we miss family dinner." Mitchell felt the familiar anger building in his chest, but he swallowed it down. At 48, he learned that fighting Kara about her family only made things worse. Besides, he'd been raised to believe in the sanctity of marriage, in supporting your spouse through thick and thin. His own parents, dead now for 5 years, had modeled a partnership built on compromise. But they'd never met Leah Steele. "The kid's got a paying gig," Mitchell said, keeping his tone measured. "First one in months. Maybe we could skip this week." Kara's eyes flashed. "My mother has cancer, Mitchell. Stage 3. Every Sunday dinner could be her last, and you want to skip it so Lonnie can play his guitar for drunks at some dive bar?" Lonnie stood abruptly, the guitar strap sliding off his shoulder. "It's fine, Dad. I'll cancel." "Lonnie, I said it's fine." His son's voice was hollow as he disappeared into his bedroom, closing the door with deliberate gentleness. That was Lonnie. Always gentle, always yielding, always trying to keep the peace. Mitchell had once thought it was maturity. Now he recognized it as defeat. After Kara returned to her laptop in the living room, Mitchell poured himself a bourbon and stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the city lights. The Steeles lived in Riverside Hills, the affluent suburb where old money bred contempt for anyone who hadn't inherited their success. Mitchell had grown up in Fairmont, a working-class neighborhood where his father had operated a small auto repair shop. He'd put himself through community college, worked as a freight coordinator for 23 years, and raised Lonnie alone after Lonnie's mother, Mitchell's first wife, Sarah, had died of an aneurysm when the boy was only 3. For 16 years, it had been just the two of them. Mitchell had coached Lonnie's little league team, taught him to change oil and fix a carburetor, sat through every school concert where Lonnie played trumpet in the band. When Lonnie showed an interest in guitar at 14, Mitchell had saved for months to buy him a decent Fender. The kid had talent, real talent. Not the kind you forced or faked, but the organic kind that came from somewhere deep and true. Then Mitchell had met Kara at a company mixer. She was beautiful, educated, and seemed charmed by his blue-collar authenticity. They'd dated for 8 months before she introduced him to her family, and by then, Mitchell was too in love to see the warning signs. Roman Steele, Kara's father, was a retired investment banker who'd made his fortune in the 80s and spent his retirement playing golf and criticizing anyone who hadn't followed his path to wealth. Leah Steele, Kara's mother, was a former beauty queen who'd married up and spent 40 years perfecting the art of passive-aggressive cruelty disguised as concern. Earl Steele, Kara's older brother, had inherited his father's firm and his mother's disdain for the lower classes. And Brandy Steele, Kara's younger sister, was a real estate agent who measured success in square footage and luxury car leases. From the moment Mitchell and Lonnie had entered their lives, the Steeles had made it clear they were inferior specimens. "Your boy doesn't play sports?" Roman had asked at that first dinner, eyeing 16-year-old Lonnie with undisguised disappointment. "He plays guitar," Mitchell had answered proudly. Leah had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "How artistic. I suppose every family needs a dreamer, though they rarely amount to much." That should have been Mitchell's cue to leave, to grab Lonnie and never look back. But Kara had squeezed his hand under the table, and he'd told himself that love meant accepting the whole package, flaws and all. Besides, Lonnie had seemed fine. The kid had always been resilient. But Mitchell hadn't understood, not then, how corrosive constant contempt could be. Sunday arrived with gray skies and the smell of rain. Lonnie emerged from his room wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, the uniform he'd adopted for Steele family dinners, as if dressing like them might earn their approval. It never did. The drive to Riverside Hills took 40 minutes. The Steele mansion sat on 3 acres, a colonial revival monstrosity with white columns and a circular driveway where Earl's Mercedes and Brandy's Range Rover were already parked. Mitchell pulled his 10-year-old Honda Accord behind them, feeling the familiar shame that he hated himself for feeling. Leah answered the door in a silk caftan, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite her supposed illness. Mitchell had learned that her cancer diagnosis was real. The doctors had confirmed it, but Leah wielded it like a weapon, using her mortality to manipulate and control. "You're late," she said, though they were 5 minutes early. Her eyes swept over Lonnie with practiced disdain. "And I see the worthless one came along." Mitchell felt Lonnie stiffen beside him, but his son said nothing. He never did. That was the agreement they'd made years ago: endure the dinners in silence, then go home and forget about them. Except Mitchell knew Lonnie never forgot. The wounds accumulated like compound interest. "Mother, don't start," Kara said from behind Leah, but her protest was weak, performative. "Start what? I'm simply stating facts." Leah turned and walked into the house, expecting them to follow. "Roman, your daughter's husband and his burden have arrived." The dining room was set with china that cost more than Mitchell's monthly salary. Roman sat at the head of the table, Earl to his right, Brandy to his left. Kara took her seat beside her sister, leaving Mitchell and Lonnie to sit at the far end, closest to the kitchen, the servants' end, as Roman had once joked. Dinner began with Roman's interrogation of Earl's latest business deal, a self-congratulatory monologue that lasted through the salad course. Then Brandy detailed her recent sale of a waterfront property to a tech executive, emphasizing the 7-figure commission. Kara discussed her work as a marketing consultant for a pharmaceutical company, and Leah interjected occasionally with barbed compliments that were really insults. No one asked Mitchell about his work. No one asked Lonnie about anything. "So, worthless," Leah said during the main course, using the nickname she'd given Lonnie years ago. "Still wasting your life with that guitar?" Lonnie cut his roast beef into smaller and smaller pieces. "I play when I can." "When you can," Leah repeated mockingly, as if you have anything else demanding your time. "No job, no prospects, no ambition. You're 23 years old, and you still live with your father like a child." "He's saving money," Mitchell interjected, though they both knew Lonnie had stayed in Mitchell's apartment because he couldn't afford to leave, not on the sporadic income from weekend gigs and part-time work at a music store. "Saving money," Roman scoffed. "For what? Another guitar? Another delusion that he'll somehow become the next Bob Dylan?" He shook his head. "The boy's a disappointment, Mitchell. You should have pushed him harder. Made him into something." "He is something," Mitchell said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's talented, he's kind, he's worthless," Leah finished. "Let's not pretend otherwise. We've watched this circus for 7 years now, and nothing's changed. He strums his guitar in dive bars, makes no money, has no future. If he had any decency, he'd realize he's a burden on everyone around him." Mitchell started to stand, ready to finally tell them all to go to hell, but Lonnie's hand on his arm stopped him. When Mitchell looked at his son, he saw tears streaming silently down Lonnie's face, not from sadness, but from rage and humiliation. "It's okay, Dad," Lonnie whispered. "Let it go." But it wasn't okay. Mitchell knew it wasn't okay. And as he watched his son wipe his eyes with his napkin while the Steeles returned to their conversation as if nothing had happened, Mitchell made a promise to himself that something had to change. They left immediately after dessert, Mitchell citing work the next morning. In the car, Lonnie stared out the window in silence. When they got home, he went straight to his room without a word. Mitchell stood in the kitchen, bourbon in hand, and called his wife. "We're done with the dinners," he told Kara. "I'm not subjecting Lonnie to that anymore." "You're being dramatic," Kara said, her voice tired. "They don't mean anything by it. That's just how they are. They called our son worthless. To his face. They made him cry. Lonnie's too sensitive. He needs to toughen up." The words hit Mitchell like a punch. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm serious that my mother is dying, and I want to spend time with her while I still can. I'm serious that you married into this family, and part of that means accepting them as they are." I'm serious that maybe if Lonnie actually made something of himself, they'd respect him more. Mitchell hung up. For the first time in 7 years of marriage, he hung up on his wife. He knocked on Lonnie's door. When there was no answer, he opened it carefully. Lonnie sat on his bed, guitar in his lap, playing that same haunting melody from earlier in the week. "I'm sorry," Mitchell said. Lonnie didn't look up. "For what?" "For all of it. For marrying into that family. For subjecting you to them. For not protecting you better." "Dad, stop. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have seen it sooner. And I should have ended it sooner." Lonnie's fingers stilled on the strings. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm going to divorce Kara. I should have done it years ago." For a long moment, Lonnie said nothing. Then, quietly, "Don't do that because of me. Don't blow up your life because of me." "You're my life," Mitchell said. "You're my son. And I failed you. But I'm going to fix it." Lonnie looked up then, and the expression on his face was something Mitchell had never seen before. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." The next 3 weeks were a blur of tense phone calls, sleeping on the couch, and late-night conversations with Lonnie about the future. Mitchell consulted with a divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Jane Schneider who laid out his options with clinical precision. The apartment was in Mitchell's name. They had no children together. Kara made more money than he did, so there'd be no alimony. It would be clean, if painful. But then October brought cold rain and tragedy. Mitchell came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find Kara sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale. "Lonnie's gone," she said. The world tilted. "What do you mean, gone?" "He left this morning. I thought he went to work, but the music store called. He never showed up. I've been calling his phone for hours. Nothing." Mitchell tried Lonnie's cell. Straight to voicemail. He called Lonnie's friends, the few he had. No one had seen him. He checked Lonnie's room and found the bed made, the guitar gone, some clothes missing. "Maybe he just needed some space," Kara suggested, but her voice was uncertain. Space from what? She didn't answer, but they both knew. By midnight, Mitchell was frantic. He filed a missing person report with the police. The officer who took the statement was sympathetic but realistic. 23-year-old male, left voluntarily, took belongings. "We'll keep an eye out, but unless there's evidence of foul play." The next morning, Wednesday, 2 police officers knocked on Mitchell's door. Their faces told him everything before they spoke. "Mr. Dodd, we found your son's vehicle." The words that followed were clinical, procedural. "Car discovered near Harper's Bridge over the Clearwater River. Driver's door open. Personal effects inside, including a wallet and cell phone. Skid marks on the embankment. No body yet, but the current was strong, the water deep and cold." They were searching. Mitchell couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The officers kept talking, something about suicide risk factors, about outreach to counselors, about next steps, but their voices sounded like they were underwater. "No," Mitchell said. "No, Lonnie wouldn't. He wouldn't do that." But even as he said it, he remembered the tears streaming down his son's face at that last dinner. He remembered 7 years of accumulated cruelty, of being called worthless, of dreams deferred and spirit broken. He remembered Lonnie telling him not to divorce Kara, not to blow up his life over Lonnie. "This is my fault," Mitchell whispered. The officers exchanged glances. "Mr. Dodd, if your son was experiencing mental health struggles, that's not anyone's fault. You don't understand. His stepfamily, they destroyed him. Year after year, they tore him down, and I let it happen." Over the next 3 days, searchers combed the river. They found nothing. On Saturday, the police chief, a weary man named Cameron Zimmerman, delivered the news Mitchell had been dreading. "We're calling off the active search," Zimmerman said. "The current is too strong. If your son went into that water, his body could be miles downstream by now, or caught in debris. We'll keep monitoring, but..." He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy. "Your son is dead." The funeral was scheduled for the following Friday, a service without a body, a memorial for a young man who'd vanished into dark water. Mitchell moved through the planning in a fog. Kara tried to help, but her family's involvement turned preparation into a nightmare. Leah insisted on overseeing the arrangements. "As the matriarch of the family, it's my responsibility," she'd said, and Mitchell had been too shattered to fight. She chose the flowers, the music, the venue. A Presbyterian church the Dodd family had never attended, but the Steeles considered appropriately prestigious. The morning of the funeral, Mitchell stood in front of his bathroom mirror, struggling to knot his tie. His hands shook. He'd barely slept in a week, and when he did, he dreamed of Lonnie sinking into black water, calling for help that never came. The church was half full. Most of the attendees were Steele family friends, people who'd never met Lonnie. A handful of musicians from the Blue Room sat in the back, young men and women with tattoos and grief-stricken faces. They'd been Lonnie's real family, Mitchell realized. The people who'd seen his talent and celebrated it. Mitchell sat in the front pew, Kara beside him, the Steeles arrayed around them like vultures. The pastor, a man who admitted he'd never met Lonnie, delivered a generic sermon about the mysteries of God's plan. Earl gave a eulogy that painted Lonnie as a troubled soul who'd finally found peace. Brandy read a poem about angels and heaven that made Mitchell want to scream. Then Leah stood to speak. She walked to the pulpit slowly, milking the moment. Her black dress was elegant and expensive. Her makeup was perfect. She gripped the sides of the pulpit and looked out at the congregation with glistening eyes. Lonnie Dodd was a young man who struggled, she began, her voice trembling with false emotion. He struggled to find his place in the world. He struggled to meet expectations. He struggled with feelings of inadequacy that, despite our family's best efforts to support him, ultimately consumed him. Mitchell's hands clenched into fists. We tried, Leah continued. God knows we tried. We invited him into our home, into our family. We offered him guidance, opportunities, love. But some people are too broken to be saved. Some people are, in the end. She paused, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. For just a moment, Mitchell saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It was satisfaction. Too weak for this world, Leah finished. And so we commit him to God's mercy, hoping he's finally found the peace that eluded him in life. As she returned to her seat, she passed Mitchell's pew. Their eyes met, and Leah Steele smiled. It was subtle, a tiny upward quirk of her lips, gone in an instant. But Mitchell saw it. He saw the triumph in her eyes, the vindication. This was what she'd wanted all along. Not to fix Lonnie, not to help him, but to break him so completely that he'd disappear. And she'd succeeded. Mitchell sat through the rest of the service in stunned silence. At the reception afterward, held at the Steele mansion, he watched the family play their roles. Roman accepted condolences with stoic dignity. Earl and Brandy worked the room, thanking people for coming. Kara clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face. Though whether she grieved for Lonnie or for Leah's cancer, Mitchell couldn't tell. But Leah was different. She moved through the crowd with energy that belied her illness. She laughed quietly at someone's joke. She squeezed hands and accepted hugs. And when she thought no one was watching, Mitchell saw that same small smile. He left early, unable to stomach another moment. In his car, he sat in the darkness and finally let himself break. He sobbed for his son, for all the ways he'd failed him, for the 7 years of torture he'd permitted. He sobbed until his throat was raw and his eyes burned. Then he drove home to an empty apartment and bourbon that didn't dull the pain. The year that followed was a descent into hell. Mitchell filed for divorce in November, and Kara didn't fight it. The process was quick and cold, and by February, it was finalized. They divided their minimal shared assets, and Kara moved back to the Steele mansion to care for her ailing mother. Mitchell quit his job in January. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't function. He lived off savings and Lonnie's life insurance, a small policy Mitchell had maintained since Lonnie was born. The irony of profiting from his son's death made him sick, but he needed to eat. He spent most of his time in Lonnie's room, surrounded by his son's possessions. The guitar was gone. Lonnie had taken it with him, but everything else remained. Posters of classic rock legends on the walls. Stacks of handwritten sheet music. Notebooks filled with lyrics. A life interrupted. Mitchell had expected closure to come with time. Instead, the questions multiplied. Why that night? Why that bridge? Had Lonnie planned it? Or had it been impulsive? Had he suffered? Had he thought of Mitchell in those final moments? The police had found Lonnie's car with the keys in the ignition, the radio still on, his wallet and phone on the passenger seat. But no note. No goodbye. No explanation. Just an open door and dark water. It didn't make sense. Lonnie had been methodical, thoughtful. If he'd planned to end his life, wouldn't he have left something? Some final message? Mitchell tried to move forward. He tried to accept that he'd never know. But late at night, when the bourbon ran out and sleep wouldn't come, He'd replay that funeral in his mind. He'd see Leah's smile, and he'd wonder. In September, almost exactly a year after Lonnie's disappearance, Mitchell received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Dodd? This is Nathan Lawrence. I'm an attorney. I have something for you from your son." Mitchell nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "I represented Lonnie Dodd. He retained my services last October, just before his death. He left instructions that I was to contact you exactly 1 year after he was declared deceased. I have an envelope for you. Can we meet?" Mitchell's heart pounded. "When?" "Today, if possible. I'm at my office until 6. Nathan Lawrence's office was in a modest building downtown, nothing like the gleaming high-rises where the Steeles conducted their business. Lawrence himself was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and an easy manner. He shook Mitchell's hand and gestured to a chair. "I'm sorry for your loss," Lawrence said. "I only met Lonnie twice, but he struck me as a good kid." "You met him?" "When?" "Last October. First week of the month. He came to me asking about drafting a will and some other documents. He paid me in cash, $500. Said he didn't want any paper trail." Mitchell's mind raced. First week of October. That was before Lonnie disappeared. What kind of documents? Lawrence pulled a manila envelope from his desk drawer. "This." He said if anything happened to him, I was to wait exactly 1 year and then give this to you. He was very specific about the timing. The envelope was thick, sealed with tape. Mitchell's name was written on it in Lonnie's careful handwriting. His hand shook as he took it. "Did he say anything else?" "He said." Lawrence hesitated. "He said to tell you that none of this was your fault, that you were the only good thing in his life, and that he was sorry." Tears blurred Mitchell's vision. "Thank you." He waited until he was back in his car to open the envelope. Inside, he found a flash drive, a set of keys he didn't recognize, and a letter. With trembling hands, he unfolded the letter. "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I know how much that's going to hurt you, and I wish there was another way. But there isn't. I need you to understand something. What happened to me wasn't an accident. It wasn't suicide, either, though I knew that's what everyone would think. The Steeles killed me, Dad. Maybe not with their own hands, but they killed me just the same. For 7 years, they broke me down piece by piece. They made me believe I was worthless. They made me hate myself. And in the end, they made sure I'd disappear. I can't tell you everything here. It's not safe. But the flash drive contains recordings. Conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Proof of what they did. And the keys, those open something that will change everything. I recorded them, Dad. For months, I recorded them. Every family dinner, every phone call I could capture, every moment when they thought I wasn't listening. And what I learned, God, what I learned would make you sick. There's a storage unit in Fairmont. 1247, Industrial Way, Unit 23. The keys open it. Inside, you'll find everything. All the evidence. All the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I couldn't fight them the way you would have. But maybe, with what I'm leaving you, you can finish what I couldn't. Make them pay, Dad. Not for me. For every person they've ever destroyed. I love you. I'm sorry. Lonnie." Mitchell read the letter 3 times. Then he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. There were dozens of audio files, dated and labeled. He clicked on the first one, dated September 15th of the previous year. It was recorded at the Steele mansion, during a family dinner Mitchell and Lonnie hadn't attended. Leah's voice came through clearly. "The worthless one wasn't here tonight. Small mercies." Earl's laugh followed. "How much longer do we have to pretend to tolerate him?" "Until Mother's estate is settled," Brandy said. "Kara's divorce wouldn't look good to the lawyers right now. We need to maintain the appearance of family unity." Roman's voice, gravelly and cold. "The boy's a drain on resources. On morale. The sooner Kara cuts ties with Mitchell, the sooner we can be rid of both of them." "I've been working on Kara," Leah said. "Subtly. Planting seeds. She's already questioning whether Mitchell is worth keeping around. Once she inherits, she'll leave him. And good riddance." Mitchell's hands clenched the steering wheel. He clicked on another file. And another. File after file revealed the Steeles' true nature. Their contempt for anyone outside their class. Their manipulation of Kara. Their deliberate cruelty toward Lonnie. But it was the last file, dated October 8th, that made Mitchell's blood turn to ice. Leah's voice. "I saw him today. Lurking around the house, trying to be invisible. The guitar was gone from his car. I think he's planning to leave." "Earl, good. Let him go. We'll all be better off. Leah, no. Not yet. If he runs away, Mitchell might blame Kara. Might fight the divorce harder. We need closure. Something definitive. A pause. Then Roman, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Leah said slowly, that accidents happen. Young men with depression, feeling like failures, sometimes make terrible choices. And if they make those choices near water, well, bodies don't always surface. Jesus Christ, Mother, Kara's voice shocked. You can't be serious. I'm perfectly serious. The boy is ruining our family. He's a stain on our reputation. And most importantly, he's an obstacle to your inheritance and your future. We handle this carefully, and everyone benefits. You're talking about murder, Kara said, but her voice was weak. I'm talking about a problem solving itself, Leah corrected. With minimal help from us. The recording continued. They planned it together. Earl and Roman would follow Lonnie, create a situation where his car would end up near the river, make it look like suicide. Leah would coach Kara on how to act devastated. Brandy would manage the funeral arrangements to control the narrative. And Kara agreed. Maybe not enthusiastically, but she agreed. Mitchell sat in his car, numb with horror, as the truth crashed over him. They'd killed Lonnie. His wife and her family had murdered his son. But if they'd murdered him, where was the body? The police never found it. Was it possible? He grabbed the keys from the envelope and drove to Fairmont. The storage facility was a squat concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence. Unit 23 was in the back, a 10-by-10 space with a rolling metal door. Mitchell's hands shook as he fit the key into the lock. Inside, he found a camping cot, boxes of canned food, and a duffel bag. And sitting on the cot, very much alive, was Lonnie Dodd. Father and son stared at each other for a long moment. Then Mitchell crossed the space in 3 strides and pulled Lonnie into a crushing embrace. Lonnie hugged him back, and both men wept. You're alive? Mitchell gasped. You're alive. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. They sat on the cot, and Lonnie explained everything. He'd known the Steeles were planning something. He'd recorded their conversations for months, initially just to document their cruelty, but then the recordings had become darker. When he heard them discussing his accident, he'd made a choice. I staged it, Lonnie said. The car by the river. I made it look like I jumped. But I walked away. I've been hiding here, living off cash from selling my guitar and some gigs under a fake name. I couldn't contact you because I knew they'd be watching. If they thought I was alive, they'd try again. And they might hurt you too. Why now? Why wait a year? Because in a year, I'd legally be declared dead. Their plan would be complete. They'd think they got away with it. And because... Lonnie pulled out another envelope from the duffel bag. Because I needed time to gather more evidence. To make sure when we went after them, they'd never see it coming. Mitchell took the envelope. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, emails, a paper trail showing that Leah Steele had been embezzling from her own cancer charity for years. That Earl's investment firm was running a Ponzi scheme. That Brandy had been involved in mortgage fraud. And that Roman had been bribing city officials for building contracts. I hired a private investigator, Lonnie said. Guy named Jeff Sampson. Ex-cop, doesn't ask too many questions. I gave him the cash for my guitar and told him to dig into the Steeles. Turns out, they're dirty as hell. This isn't just about what they did to me, Dad. They're criminals. And now we have proof. Mitchell looked at his son, his brilliant, resourceful, very much alive son, and felt something he hadn't felt in over a year. He felt hope and rage. We're going to destroy them, Mitchell said. Lonnie smiled. A hard, cold smile that Mitchell had never seen on his gentle son's face before. That's the plan. But we have to be smart. We can't just go to the police with the murder conspiracy. They'll lawyer up, claim the recordings are fake or taken out of context. We need to hit them where it really hurts first. Over the next 3 hours, father and son crafted their strategy. They had the recordings proving the Steeles had planned murder. They had evidence of financial crimes. And they had the element of surprise. Everyone thought Lonnie was dead. First, Mitchell said, we expose their financial crimes. Anonymously. Send the evidence to the FBI, the IRS, the State Attorney General. Let the investigations begin. Then, Lonnie continued, we leak the murder conspiracy to a journalist. Someone who'll investigate before publishing. We give them everything. The recordings, the timeline, the staged suicide. And finally, Mitchell finished. When they're reeling, when their world is falling apart, We reveal that you're alive. We show them that their victim survived, and he's the one bringing them down. There's one more thing, Lonnie said quietly. Kara. She was part of it, Dad. I'm sorry, but she knew. She agreed to it. Mitchell nodded slowly. The betrayal from Kara cut deeper than the others because he'd loved her. But love didn't excuse complicity in attempted murder. She'll face justice too, he said. They spent the next week preparing. Lonnie couldn't leave the storage unit yet. Too risky, so Mitchell became his liaison to the outside world. He contacted Jeff Sampson, the PI, and verified all the financial evidence. He made copies of everything. He created anonymous email accounts and started sending documentation to law enforcement agencies. Within days, the investigation into Earl Steele's investment firm began. The FBI raided his offices. The IRS started auditing Roman's construction companies. The state attorney general launched an inquiry into Leah's cancer charity. The Steeles were in chaos. Mitchell watched from a distance as the family scrambled. Earl hired a team of lawyers. Roman tried to call in favors with city officials, only to find that their relationship was now under investigation too. Leah's charity board demanded her resignation, and Kara, caught in the middle, started making frantic phone calls trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. It's time for phase 2, Mitchell told Lonnie. He'd identified the perfect journalist, an investigative reporter named Glenn Sherman who specialized in exposing corruption among the wealthy. Sherman had a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and ethical. Mitchell sent him the recordings of the murder conspiracy along with the timeline of Lonnie's staged death. Sherman spent 2 weeks investigating. He interviewed Mitchell, who played the grieving father perfectly. He submitted FOIA requests for the police files on Lonnie's disappearance. He consulted with audio forensics experts who confirmed the recordings were genuine. He built an airtight case. The story broke on a Sunday morning, front page of the city's largest newspaper. Local family accused in plot to murder son-in-law. The article was devastating. Sherman laid out the evidence methodically. The recordings, the planned accident, the funeral where Leah had smiled. He quoted experts saying this appeared to be a clear case of conspiracy to commit murder. He included statements from Mitchell about years of abuse Lonnie had suffered at the Steeles' hands. The public reaction was immediate and furious. The Steeles' social media accounts were flooded with death threats. Protesters gathered outside the mansion in Riverside Hills. News vans camped on their lawn. And the police, who'd originally ruled Lonnie's death a suicide, reopened the case as a homicide investigation. Mitchell watched it all unfold with grim satisfaction. But he wasn't done yet. He had one more card to play. 3 weeks after the article published, with the Steeles facing criminal charges for the financial crimes and under investigation for Lonnie's murder, Mitchell arranged for a very public event. He called a press conference at the same church where Lonnie's funeral had been held. The media turned out in force, expecting Mitchell to make a statement about the ongoing investigations. Instead, he walked onto the stage with someone they weren't expecting. Lonnie Dodd, alive and well, stood before the cameras. The gasps from the assembled press were audible. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. And Mitchell let them stew for a moment before raising his hand for silence. "My name is Mitchell Dodd," he said into the microphone. "And this is my son, Lonnie. As you can see, he's not dead. But the Steele family tried very hard to make him dead." Lonnie stepped forward and told his story. He explained how he'd overheard the plot against his life. How he'd decided to fake his death to protect himself and gather evidence. How he'd spent a year in hiding while his father mourned him. He played clips of the recordings for the press. Leah's voice, discussing how accidents happen near water. Earl and Roman planning the staged suicide. Kara agreeing to the plot. "They called me worthless," Lonnie said, his voice steady and strong. "They spent 7 years trying to break me. And when I wouldn't break, they tried to kill me. But I'm still here. And I'm going to make sure they face justice for what they've done." The press conference made national news. The video of Lonnie's resurrection went viral. The Steeles, who'd already been struggling under the weight of financial investigations, now faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud. And in the court of public opinion, they were already convicted. The next 6 months were a blur of legal proceedings. Earl Steele's Ponzi scheme collapsed completely, leaving dozens of investors bankrupt. He was arrested and charged with wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Unable to make bail, He sat in jail awaiting trial. Roman Steele's construction empire fell apart as the bribery investigation revealed decades of corruption. He was indicted on multiple counts of bribery, fraud, and tax evasion. His assets were frozen, and his companies went into bankruptcy. Brandy Steele lost her real estate license and was charged with mortgage fraud. She tried to flee the state, but was arrested at the airport. Her Range Rover was repossessed. Leah Steele, the matriarch who'd orchestrated so much of the cruelty, faced the harshest consequences. She was charged as the ringleader of the conspiracy to murder Lonnie. Her cancer charity was dissolved, and she was charged with embezzlement of over $2 million. The cancer she'd weaponized for sympathy proved to be real, but even that couldn't save her. She was denied bail and placed in the prison medical wing. And Kara tried to cut a deal. She claimed she'd been manipulated by her family, that she'd never really agreed to the plan, that she'd tried to stop them. But the recordings told a different story. While her charges were slightly reduced in exchange for testimony against her family, she still faced conspiracy charges. Mitchell attended every hearing, every arraignment, every bail review. He sat in the gallery and watched the Steeles, dressed in orange jumpsuits instead of designer clothes, shuffle into court in shackles. He watched them plead, beg, and finally break. Lonnie came with him sometimes, but not always. His son was rebuilding his life, slowly. He'd gotten an apartment in Fairmont, near Mitchell. He'd started playing guitar again, this time at better venues that actually paid. He was seeing a therapist to process the trauma, and he was healing. The trials took another year. In the end, justice was served. Earl Steele received 20 years in federal prison for financial fraud. Roman got 15 years for bribery and corruption. Brandy got 8 years for mortgage fraud. Kara, who testified against her family, received 5 years with a chance of parole in 3. And Leah Steele, the woman who'd smiled at her victim's funeral, received life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and embezzlement. Her cancer treatments continued in prison, but the doctors gave her less than 2 years to live. She would die behind bars, alone and despised. On the day of Leah's sentencing, Mitchell and Lonnie sat in the courtroom and watched the verdict delivered. The judge, a stern woman named Dorothy Clifford, looked at Leah with undisguised contempt. "You used your position of power to torment a young man for years," Judge Clifford said. "You called him worthless, degraded him, and ultimately tried to have him killed to protect your family's wealth and reputation. You showed no remorse, no humanity, no decency. This court finds you irredeemable and sentences you to life without the possibility of parole." Leah didn't cry. She didn't protest. She simply stared straight ahead, her face a mask of hatred. As the bailiffs led her away, she passed Mitchell's seat. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Mitchell smiled. It was subtle, a tiny upward quirk of his lips, gone in an instant. But Leah saw it. She saw the triumph in his eyes, the vindication. This was what he'd wanted all along. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice, accountability. And he'd succeeded. After the sentencing, Mitchell and Lonnie walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine. Reporters shouted questions, but they ignored them. They'd said everything that needed to be said. "How do you feel?" Mitchell asked his son. Lonnie was quiet for a moment, considering. "Lighter," he finally said. "Like I can breathe for the first time in years." "Yeah," Mitchell agreed. "Me too." They went to lunch at a diner in Fairmont, the working-class neighborhood where Mitchell had grown up. It wasn't fancy, just good food and honest people. The kind of place the Steeles would have sneered at. Over burgers and coffee, they talked about the future. Lonnie had been offered a regular gig at a music venue downtown. Steady pay, benefits, a chance to build something real. Mitchell had started working part-time at his late father's old auto repair shop, which was now run by a former employee who remembered Mitchell as a kid. "I've been thinking," Lonnie said, "about the money from the Steeles restitution. As part of the settlements, the court had ordered the Steeles to pay damages to Mitchell and Lonnie for the emotional distress, the attempted murder, and the year of hiding. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. We should do something good with it," Lonnie continued. "Set up a foundation or something. Help kids who are being bullied or abused by family members. Give them resources, support, a way out." Mitchell felt a surge of pride. His son, who'd been called worthless, who'd been terrorized and nearly killed, wanted to use his suffering to help others. "That's a perfect idea," Mitchell said. We'll call it the Lonnie Dodd Foundation. No, Lonnie said with a small smile. Call it the Survivors Foundation. Because that's what we are. We survived them. 2 years later, the foundation was thriving. They'd helped dozens of young people escape abusive family situations, provided counseling and financial support, and advocated for stronger laws protecting vulnerable adults from family coercion. Lonnie was now a full-time musician, playing sold-out shows at mid-sized venues. His first album, titled Resurrected, had won critical acclaim. The title track was about his experience, the years of abuse, the fake death, the ultimate triumph. Mitchell had remarried, a kind woman named Amy Green who worked as a nurse and had never met the Steels. She and Lonnie got along wonderfully. For the first time in a decade, Mitchell's life felt whole. The Steels, meanwhile, faded from public consciousness. Earl, Roman, and Brandy sat in their respective prisons, forgotten by the society they'd once dominated. Cara was released after 3 years and moved to another state, changing her name and trying to disappear. And Leah Steele died in prison 18 months after her sentencing, alone in the medical wing. Her cancer had spread, and she'd refused treatment toward the end. Mitchell read about her death in a brief obituary that mentioned her crimes more than her life. He felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sorrow, not relief. Just nothing. She'd been a cancer, and now the cancer was gone. On the anniversary of Lonnie's resurrection, Mitchell and his son returned to Harper's Bridge, the place where Lonnie's car had been found, where his death had been staged. They stood on the bridge looking down at the water. "I used to be afraid of this place," Lonnie said. "It represented everything they tried to do to me. But now," he paused, "now it just looks like a river." "It's just a river," Mitchell agreed. They threw flowers into the water, not for mourning, but for release. For letting go of the past and embracing the future. For acknowledging that they'd survived, and more than that, they'd won. As they walked back to the car, Lonnie turned to his father. "Thank you," he said, "for never giving up on me. For believing I was worth saving. For finishing what I started." Mitchell put his arm around his son's shoulders. "You were always worth it, Lonnie. Always. And anyone who couldn't see that was blind." They drove home together, to the life they'd rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy. It wasn't perfect. They still had scars, still had nightmares sometimes. But it was theirs, earned through survival and strength and the unbreakable bond between father and son. The Steels had called Lonnie worthless. They'd tried to erase him from existence. But in the end, it was the Steels who'd been erased. And Mitchell and Lonnie Dodd, the two men they'd underestimated, stood victorious. They'd proven something the Steels never understood. Worth isn't measured in money or status or pedigree. It's measured in resilience, in character, in the courage to fight back against those who try to destroy you. And by that measure, Mitchell and Lonnie Dodd were priceless. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.